I used to think being easygoing was just my personality, like. That was the nice way to describe it. Low maintenance, flexible, not a problem. I didn't notice it as money at first. It felt social. It felt like saying yes without making a thing out of it. Nodding along, going with the flow. Not being the guy who slows everyone down or asks too many questions. At the time, none of it registered as spending. It felt more like mood management. Like I was paying a small fee to keep things light. And honestly, I was tired a lot back then. Not exhausted in a dramatic way. Just done enough with the day that smooth felt better than honest. I told myself it was fine because nothing felt big. No single moment stood out. No red flags, no splurges, just small choices that felt social. And somehow, those never made it into my mental budget at all. Food was where it showed up first, even though I didn't see it that way. Grabbing something to eat became the answer to everything. Catching up, killing time, making a conversation less awkward. It was never framed like spending money. It was just lunch or coffee or dinner because we were already there. $18 lunches, $26 dinners, $9 coffees that somehow happened twice in the same afternoon. Individually, none of it felt worth thinking about. But when I finally looked at a month, it wasn't small anymore. It was a few $100s that didn't even feel intentional. What bothered me wasn't just the number. It was realizing how often I ate things I didn't really want. I wasn't hungry, I was participating. I told myself it was normal, everyone does this. But I remember feeling oddly full and slightly resentful at the same time, and not knowing who that resentment was even for. After a while, it stopped being just food. Convenience slid in quietly, especially when other people were involved. Ride shares instead of walking 5 blocks. Delivery instead of cooking because everyone was already tired. Paying a little extra to keep things moving. $7 delivery fees. $12 surge pricing. $3 or $4 here just to save 10 minutes and avoid the pause where someone asks, "So, what do you want to do?" None of it felt indulgent. It felt polite, like I was buying efficiency for the group. But when I added it up later, it wasn't a few dollars anymore. It was a few hundred a month, easy. And that was the part I didn't want to look at first, because the truth was I wasn't paying for speed. I was paying to avoid friction, to avoid being the one who slows things down or suggests something less convenient. I told myself I was flexible. Looking back, I think I was just avoiding that small moment of discomfort where everyone has to adjust. Then there was splitting things evenly. Group checks, shared rentals, weekend trips where someone says, "We'll just divide it, it's easier." On paper, that sounds fair. And most of the time, I went along with it without thinking. But my life wasn't evenly split like that. My income wasn't moving at the same pace as everyone else's. $300 weekends. $1,200 group trips that I said yes to before I fully understood the number. It always felt easier to absorb the cost than explain myself. Easier to swipe than to pause the mood. And I never thought of it as pressure. I thought of it as being low maintenance. But there's a quiet weight that comes from paying for harmony over and over again. Not enough to break you. Just enough to make you feel smaller about money than you probably need to. Subscriptions crept in around the same time, but they didn't feel like my spending either. They felt shared. Someone mentioned a show. Someone else sent a link. Just sign up. It's like $10. And $10 didn't feel like anything. $9.99 here. $14.99 there. A music app because everyone used it. A streaming service I barely opened, but kept because canceling felt like stepping out of a conversation I might need later. When I finally said the number out loud, how much all of it cost me every month, it surprised me in a way I didn't enjoy. Not because it was outrageous, but because I couldn't really defend it. I wasn't getting value. I was getting access. The option to not be out of the loop. And somehow that turned into a recurring charge I stopped noticing until it was already normal. Then there were the occasions. Birthdays, engagements, weddings that stacked up in the same year. $30 gifts turned into $50. $50 turned into $75 because everyone else was doing more, and I didn't want to be the cheap one. I remember telling myself it was generosity, that it felt good to show up for people. And it did, sometimes. But when I counted a year, 6 birthdays, 2 weddings, 1 group vacation gift, it was real money. Not devastating, just heavy. Heavy enough to feel in my chest when the next invite came in. What made it uncomfortable wasn't the spending itself. It was realizing how often generosity had quietly turned into obligation, and how rarely I admitted that part out loud, even to myself. Going out at night had its own version of that pressure, drinks especially. I didn't even like drinking that much, but I liked not being the odd one out. One more round sounded harmless. $14 cocktails didn't. But they didn't feel like $14 in the moment. They felt like staying in sync, like matching the energy in the room, so nobody had to ask why I was slowing down. Tabs would cross $80 before I noticed, and I'd laugh it off, tell myself it was just one night. The next morning, checking my account always felt quieter than the night before. Not panic, just a small drop in my stomach. I never regretted seeing people. I just regretted how little intention there was behind the spending. Clothes snuck in the same way, not fashion exactly, more like camouflage. Things I bought because I didn't want to stand out for the wrong reason. A jacket that fit the room, shoes that felt acceptable. None of it excited me, and that should have been a clue. When I finally looked at my closet and thought about cost per wear, some of those numbers were embarrassing. Not because they were high, but because they represented how much I'd paid just to blend in. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying not to feel exposed. And apparently, that had a price. Travel made it harder to see clearly, short trips that sounded cheap, flights that were only $200, hotels that were shared, so it felt responsible, then food, then rides, then the unspoken expectation that you're on vacation, so you spend like it. $220 for the flight, $180 for the hotel, $300 for everything else without even thinking. I never regretted going. That's the tricky part. But I did regret how casually I said yes, like the money part would sort itself out later. It always did, just not kindly. I used to say it's just money a lot, like that phrase could make discomfort disappear. And in the moment, it worked. But money you dismiss still counts. When I finally added up a rough year, food, drinks, trips, subscriptions, convenience, it landed higher than I expected. Not shocking, just undeniable. That was the moment I paused. The moment I realized this was the part I didn't want to look at first, because nothing about it felt reckless. It felt normal, and that's what made it unsettling. What I noticed next was how much worse it got when I was low on energy. Busy months, stressful stretches at work, times when I didn't have the bandwidth to think ahead. Those were the months I spent the most without realizing it. Tired versions of me were expensive. Not dramatic purchases, just more yeses. More convenience, more, we'll figure it out later. I don't blame that version of myself. But I don't ignore him anymore either. Credit cards made it all smoother, too smooth. Swiping felt easier than speaking up, easier than pausing the group or asking a question I didn't want to answer. And the interest charges that showed up later felt disconnected from the moment that caused them. Future me paid for present comfort quietly. It took a while to connect those dots. Longer than I'd like to admit. I wasn't even jealous of anyone. That's the strange part. I just adjusted. Someone else's normal slowly became mine. Nicer places, better neighborhoods, slightly higher standards that didn't feel like ambition, just exposure. Comparison doesn't need envy to cost money. It just needs proximity. A lot of it came down to boundaries I didn't have because boundaries felt awkward. Silence felt mature, easy, but unspoken limits still cost something. Every time I chose not to say anything, the bill showed up somewhere else. I kept telling myself I was being chill. Looking back, I think I was just avoiding a different kind of discomfort. The hardest part was how invisible all of this was in my budget. Spreadsheets don't capture social leakage very well. I kept looking for big mistakes, big dumb moves, but the damage was happening in the quiet places. The ones that didn't feel like decisions. It took years to notice the pattern, not months, years. Slow leaks don't trigger alarms. They just quietly change the shape of things. And hindsight doesn't help much, except to make you wish you'd paid attention sooner. Being the easy one became part of my identity. People expected it, and changing felt like I'd be letting them down. Roles have financial consequences, even the nice ones, especially the nice ones. I remember the first time I really named the pattern to myself. Not fixed it, just saw it clearly. Awareness didn't save me money right away. It just made things heavier in a different way. But it also made them honest. When I think about the cumulative total now, years of small social costs, it's not a number I love. Over a couple of decades, it's easily tens of thousands of dollars. Not all wasted, not all regret, but definitely shaping more of my life than I realized. Sometimes I picture myself sitting somewhere ordinary, a table, a bench, nothing fancy, not declining anything, not buying anything either, just noticing. Because these small choices don't ask permission, they don't announce themselves, they just show up one after another, and I'm still learning how to notice them before they add up again.